We were looking at the the statement you made after your appointment, and it was very much championing diversity in local government. I was wondering how things have changed since you've been in your role.
I think it's out there doing it should be encouraging a more diverse range of people coming forward, and I've actively campaigned, particularly in my own political party, to get more women and BME candidates involved. So I go around local Labour groups and speak to people, and in fact there's a woman putting herself forward for the Vale of Glamorgan parliamentary seat, and she wrote to me and said, I've done this as a direct consequence of the event that I attended where you said to encourage, she said, because you said you've got to put your money where your mouth is, and so I've done that, and thank you. And I mean, that's great. If I just get a handful more of representations, that's more than we had before, but obviously I'd like much greater numbers than that. So it's role modelling, it's going out there, evangelising really about it, telling people how to do it, and breaking down those barriers and saying, it is for everyone.
How do you feel, obviously in the previous local election there was 26% of women candidates, 26% of councillors elected were women. This time around it's about 27.8, nearly 28%. So there are small improvements. Do you feel that parties generally, not just your own, are taking it seriously enough?
I think we will always need to have some kind of quota system. I know in my own party, the Labour Party, that we looked for 50-50 candidature, and whether we were successful in gaining more women candidates, that was a direct result of that. So I think that you do need to have, and particularly, say in my party, we're looking at all women shortlists, all those kinds of things are important. And it's about breaking through those barriers, because we wouldn't have had the representation that we had in the Assembly if we hadn't had twinning.
I was going to ask you about this. The Assembly has often obviously been a lot more, I guess, successful in terms of its diversity, particularly in gender balance over the last 20 years nearly. Why is local government a little bit slower, do you think, in catching up with that kind of gender balance?
There's probably a variety of reasons, but the main reason is to allow women and BME candidates to see that it's for them. And there are barriers to representation in terms of timings of meetings, availability, and it's quite a jump when you're doing it as well as doing a full-time job or caring responsibilities. And those are the issues that you don't have when you become a professional politician, because we're kind of, we're semis, aren't we, in council? So a lot of councillors still have full-time jobs or caring responsibilities. But when you get into the upper echelons, like cabinet members or leaders, then it is obviously a full-time job. So it's about that balance. It's about people being able to make that commitment. And, these days, I don't want to go into some massive discussion about social media, but in the old days, people would talk about you in bar rooms and you weren't standing outside the door listening to the horrible things they were saying about you. These days, I call it anti-social media actually, and to expose your family and your friends to that, if you get into public life, that's probably as challenging as anything else, because the climate has changed immensely. I've been a councillor for 14 years, I've won 4 elections, and I've never had so much hassle or dissent as I've had in the last 2 years. It's really, it's quite awful really, the way in which, things will balance back and things will settle down. I'm an eternal optimist and I believe in the goodness of people, but at the moment, that's a consideration, and some people and some women don't want that. They don't want that kind of unnecessary attention and that nastiness that comes from putting yourself in public life.
Do you think that is worse for diverse candidates? Do you think that they face more?
Oh, definitely.
Scrutiny?
Women, definitely. I don't, I know quite a lot of politicians in my own party, but I don't know Diane Abbott. But I can tell you, the effects that she took. It was appalling, the treatment she had last year in the general election, the targeting of her, as a BME woman. It was utterly disgraceful. And you know, and it's those kinds of things that put people off.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. You picked up there on a number of issues, but one of those was around, I guess, the role of a councillor for a lot of women is quite potentially difficult. How do you think local authorities can better support women who have kind of childcare issues, who need to take maternity leave, that kind of situation?
Well, I know, for example, when I started on the council and I was working full-time as a teacher, it was really impossible to try and get to some of these meetings that were held at 10 o'clock in the day. So I helped to change that over the years. So, for example, main council now begins at 5 o'clock. Just something simply like with my own cabinet meeting, it used to be you'd have a pre-cabinet at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning and then the public meeting at 11. Well, I've switched that. So on a Monday, we have pre-cabinet at 4:30, so I can have cabinet members who work. And then we have public cabinet then on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So it's about moving meetings. Now, again, apparently, you know, there's ups and downs with that, because some women say to me, well, you know, that's the time the kids come home from school. That's when we've got to get tea sorted and get them onto their clubs and whatever. So there is no perfect solution, but moving meetings around, and we will develop more Skype and technology in the future. It's still a bit rudimentary at the moment. But, you know, that would be a way forward. So you could actually attend a meeting without actually physically being in a place. I'd like that, because I need to be in half a dozen places simultaneously. So the day that I can have a clone of me going somewhere else would be great. But no, seriously, you know, technology will help us. And that and that awareness, that kind of, you know, that family-friendly approach. And you contrast, you know, Parliament with the Assembly. You know, the Assembly has family-friendly hours and is aware of half terms and so on and so forth. Whereas Parliament, you know, it's still, you know, riding whips and horses in the 18th century ha-ha up there, isn't it? It's extremely unfriendly and working into the night. That can't be good for anyone.
I wanted to talk to you about council cabinets. I think after last year's local elections in particular, the fact that 2 out of the 22 local authorities have no women at all on their cabinets became a bit of an issue. How do you think that's played out? Are there any conversations about it within local authorities at the moment? And do you think it's important for local authorities to have representative cabinets?
We haven't had any conversations about it because, of course, each council is its sovereign body. So, you know, even as leader of the WLGA, it's not appropriate for me to tell other leaders how to run their councils. But we can have discussions and we can have suggestions, and, you know, there's more than one way of approaching an issue. I just think it's unfortunate that that situation has arisen, because when you do have a diversity, and I've got a cabinet in Newport, we're not quite 50%, we're something like 45%. Yeah, so we've got there's 9 of us, and there's 4 women in the cabinet and 5 men, and the diverse range of experience and opinion that comes into a balanced cabinet is unquestionable. So you're always looking for a skill set, but you need to. I'll give you an example. At the moment, some of our standalone companies, Newport Transport, for example, has got, you know, their senior positions are all men and the board are all men. Well, I'm looking at that, because that can't be appropriate, because half the bus users of this town are women. So there isn't a woman's voice around the table at executive level or at board level. We need to look at that. And it's having that awareness, I think. You know, so hopefully we will have some more balance in cabinets, because we're talking about Vale, Glamorgan and Blaenau Gwent, aren't we? As again, you know, it's not my role to tell those leaders what to do, but to have a discussion with them, and I'm sure they are as aware of it as they should be.
One of the things you said upon your appointment was that local government is nothing unless it reflects those communities that it represents. How do you feel? How do you think that the lack of diversity has impacted on how people feel about councils and how local communities are dealing with politics?
Well, they don't see themselves reflected in it, so they don't feel that it's about them, so they don't then have the same level of engagement. Now, when it comes to the candidates for election from my party for last year, we had a full range of BME candidates, women candidates, but some of those didn't get elected, of course. And it wasn't the case of that we put them in hard to win seats. It was just, you know, the vagaries of elections that two of those women, so I had a representative from the black and minority ethnic community, and one of the other women was from the Muslim community. You know, quirk of fate, they didn't get elected. But we tried to present people with a choice, and of course, you know, we can't do anything about the democratic deficit there.
No, that's an issue. In terms of those communities, how in the day-to-day practices of council life can we better engage, and does diversity have a role in that? Well,
we work very hard with particularly, and it's not as a result of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, but clearly that now informs all our work. So, you know, we have very strong partnerships set up at all levels within the council to ensure that partnership working is going on. And of course, the councillors that represent those areas work very hard in those areas to make sure that there is community involvement. We can always do better. And of course, we're doing everything in the cloud of austerity. So where we would want to improve those facilities in terms of engagement, those are the very areas that we're having to look to cut back on, to make sure our schools stay open, to make sure we've got social services running, to make sure the streets are kept clean. You know, I've got the same budget to run Newport now as we had when I first became a councillor in 2004. Well, give you a clue, you know, even with rudimentary arithmetic, you would understand that I haven't got enough money.
One of the big issues we deal with a lot in the Electoral Reform Society is turnout, and in local elections in particular. It's not necessarily that much different in Wales than it is to England or Scotland, but it's still low, I think, by kind of other institutional comparisons. What can we really do to engage more people, given those budget constraints you talked about?
I think it has to be, you know, we have to bite the bullet and we have to look at different ways of voting. I think the traditional going out on a Thursday to the local school is you know, again, it's 19th century stuff really, and you know, because it's a trite example, but you know, people vote for these television programs, don't they? Okay, you know, even I voted for Debbie McGee in Strictly.
Did you?
Yeah. And I'm not a great, you know, lover of these kinds of things, but look, we've got new technologies. There are huge issues of, you know, authenticity, and we're all scared of that. But I think we have to look at 21st century ways of voting and making it easier for people to vote, because then, you know, they've got, you know, they have the choice. But postal voting, of course, has proven very popular, but even that's extremely complicated. You know, I mean, I'm a seasoned professional, and every time I have to read it really carefully. You know, put it in envelope A, do that in envelope B.
You've got to get your signature inside the box.
Right. Yeah. So all those things don't make it easy.
No, absolutely. So you raised there, I guess, certain aspects of local government reform that are being driven by Welsh Government in terms of elections. There's also conversations about votes at 16 there, which we're obviously particularly interested in.
Sure.
How do you feel about getting younger people involved in local elections, whether they're voting or whether they're younger and standing for council? Do you have any good examples of young councillors that have really been involved?
Well, you're pushing at an open door with me with that, of course, because I spent over 30 years as a teacher, so I'm very familiar with young people, how they think, how they work, how they operate, and there's a desire and a hunger to be involved in politics. I was always very careful, as I had to be, to not talk, you know, party politically with young people, but I would talk about politics. And of course, the more I became involved in politics, and the more they saw me on the telly or would Google me or whatever, they'd be like, "Oh, miss, I didn't know you was the mayor of Newport." No, I'm not the mayor of Newport. I'm a local councillor in Newport, and then it would give me an opportunity to discuss. So I think we have a huge responsibility to educate young people about politics in obviously a non-partisan way, because what would happen then is that we would engage people in a lifelong journey of politics. So if we get them early and they want to know, and we explain to them what it's all about, I'm sure that would absolutely up the ante in terms of voter turnout.
Another area that hasn't been discussed a lot in diversity in political life is disability, and how local authorities can better support candidates and councillors with disabilities.
Yes, yes to all that, because yet again, that experience of disability. I'm fortunate in some ways. My mother was ill throughout most of my youth and adult life, so I am aware of the strains and stresses that can bring to a family, but yet nevertheless that didn't stop her having very strong opinions on everything. I'm just sorry that she wasn't around to see what I eventually got to, because she was extremely encouraging for me despite her disability, and wanted me to do well.
So you've been WLGA leader for around a year now.
Coming up to a year now, yeah.
What 3 things do you think you could do in the remaining period of your time as WLGA leader that would really address diversity in local government? Well,
I'll keep pushing diversity to the top of the agenda. I'll keep evangelising about it, and I'll keep being that role model that I try to be, and show people that it is something for everyone. And I'll keep the WLGA local government family together, focused on the task of delivering the best public services we can in this horrendously austere agenda that we're trying to do it in.
And do you think other parties who stand for local elections are taking it as seriously?
Well, in terms of party political, it's difficult, because I could go into a whole diatribe about my opposition now, but I don't think that would be helpful. I think what's helpful is the local government model about us working together. So, for example, I'm the education spokesperson for Wales, and that's a high-profile role. So I asked for my deputy to be from another party, and I'm fortunate that I've got Elin ap Gwyn, the leader of Ceredigion, as my deputy education spokesperson. That works very well. She's extremely knowledgeable about the portfolio, and I think it's helpful that people see us working together.
No, I agree. You mentioned earlier about the kind of measures that the Labour Party have been using, whether it's I guess voluntary quotas or zipping or women shortlists. Do you think that those should kind of be required in local government?
Yes, simple.
Well,
yes, yeah, because they work.
Yeah.
We paid. We were in Llandudno the weekend with the Welsh Labour Party conference, and a prize, an award was given to Baroness Anita Gale. It was the inaugural Marlene Thomas Award. And, that woman has done more to push gender equality in politics than anyone else. And, her legacy and her testament is that gender balanced assembly, is more women in local government, is that determination to keep that charter for women going so that we have more equal representation.